Hello. Hey, you're awake. Amazing. How was your day? Good? Good, good, good. I'm sorry? Great stories. Good. So far, so good then. Good. So we're almost at the end of the day, right? There's, I think, one more session after this one, correct? Okay. So we're going to take this easy, okay? I'm not surprised that we don't have that many people here, because this is going to be, I think, let's say, the weird talk of the day. Because you see, well, there's a strange word in the title which we don't usually see in a technical talk: heart. Scary. And so we are not going to talk about techniques, for example. This is not a technical talk. So if you want to leave now, I understand. Feel free to. Okay. But we're not going to talk about techniques. We're not going to talk about metrics or tools, et cetera, et cetera. What I'd like to talk about is basically people and the way they work together. What makes, in my opinion, the difference between an organization, a company, a team that works successfully in Agile and others who don't. So quality is definitely a subject that we'll be touching, because quality is intrinsic in the way people work. So that's the only connection I can make so far with the main theme of this conference, which is, of course, testing. Anyway, who am I? Very briefly, I work as an independent consultant. I work mainly at the organizational level. You could call me an Agile coach, but truth is, I do other things. I pay special attention to people dynamics, and also I consider organizations as living organisms, and I take that perspective when I help them adopt an Agile approach. And of course, I also have a technical background, so it's just that I enjoy more working with people and for people these days. So let's go straight to the point. This is an Agile conference. In my opinion, Agile, I mean, there are a few keywords in Agile. One is creating value, even though I'm pretty sure that if you talk with people, different people in the same company, their idea of value is not the same. Okay, so even just understanding what value means for people is interesting. There's another concept, which is, my friend. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to use the local Wi-Fi to advance the slides. Can you please swipe right on my iPad? Swipe. I need to move the slide. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, okay. Good, now it's working. Okay, thank you. iPhone, iPad, Wi-Fi. And sometimes it doesn't work as expected. So continuous improvement is another concept that we have in Agile. And of course, in my opinion, the foundation of Agile is basically these three cornerstones: transparency, feedback, and self-organization. Transparency means that everyone is aware of what's going on because the information is available. Usually we just put it on the wall so that everyone knows. Feedback, once everyone knows about the current situation, we can start giving feedback to each other. All the concepts of iterative approach, they come from the idea of having feedbacks, right? So we like to have feedbacks on a daily basis. At the end of the iteration, at the end of a release, we have feedbacks. And self-organization, which I define, I mean, to me, self-organization is not a goal, it's not a practice, it's just a collective behavior. It's a collective behavior that you see, that it manifests when the individuals in the team or in the company, they take personal responsibility in co-creating a shared future. And that's my definition of self-organization. It's a collective behavior that comes from taking personal responsibility in co-creating something together. So if you put these things together, you have what I call Agile. And there's another concept in Agile, which is the concept of sustainable. Actually, it's not a concept in Agile. We talk about sustainable pace. We know that for quality, it's important that people don't get stressed. So we try to keep the performance of the team at a sustainable pace. But there's another concept, which is sustainable growth. Sustainable growth, for me, involves a much deeper and cooperative relationship with all stakeholders. Because for your company to survive, everyone needs to be happy, including the stakeholders. And that gives you a sustainable pace. Now, just this approach can be a dramatic cultural change for many organizations. In many organizations, just the concept of transparency is scary. What do you mean? People know what I'm working on. Okay, scary. In other organizations, giving feedback is simply impossible. I don't want your opinion. Okay? And not to mention self-organization. So in my experience as a coach, I've seen many, many different clients. It always surprises me how in certain contexts, which seemed very difficult for an agile transition, things went very smoothly and nicely, and everyone was happy. And in other contexts, which I was expecting a very smooth ride, actually didn't happen. So it's not so predictable. So I started thinking, why is it not so predictable, the way people successfully use and adopt an agile approach? And I think there's a difference between what we do and the way we do it. Of course, we come from a post-industrial era. And for example, in the 19th century, we were used to mass production in assembly lines, which is a very linear way of working. And also very standard way of working. So for example, the same approach we used when we created our educational systems, which are a standardized way to mass produce educated people. And that's great, because today, 75% of the people on the planet can at least read and write and do math. So that's great. Still, it's a standardized approach to educating people. And also predictability. For example, budgets. Budgets are what we call fixed performance contracts. And it's very funny if you think about it. There are people today who are thinking about the budget for the next year, which means they are trying to predict the future in 15 months or 18 months or sometimes 2-year time. Very funny. Very funny in the world we live in. So that's the way we tend to work, because it's a cultural. We have been working this way for 200 centuries. But what we do in software is completely different, because what we produce is intangible in the same way that music is an intangible product. It exists, but you cannot touch it or smell it or do whatever you want. So it's intangible. We work with a web of people connected together. We don't work in a linear way. And we explore all the time. We need to make hypotheses and then try to validate our hypothesis. A test, for example, is a way to validate an hypothesis. So it's a very, very different way, two very different worlds. And this space here, for me, is very interesting. It's a very interesting space. Because in that space, there are many things that happen to people. And, oh, by the way, I noticed that some people are taking pictures of the slides. Please feel free to take all the pictures you want. At the same time, I want you to know that the slides are available on SlideShare. Okay? So feel free to take the pictures, but you have the slides anyway. So this space is interesting, because many of the mental models that we use in our daily work come from this dichotomy. I took the liberty of mentioning, well, you know what a mental model is, right? You have your own world, you live in this world, but that's just a relative perception. If you look from the outside, there is much more, but you live in this bubble, and that's a mental model. So some mental models that we acquire is that, for example, industrial engineering, and I'm intentionally using the word industrial and engineering. So industrial engineering is fit for software development. I don't think it is. Another mental model that we get from school is that your teacher knows, and you don't. You passively receive knowledge from someone else. And sometimes we transfer this notion to the workplace. So, for example, we say, okay, my boss knows, and I don't. You never question assumptions. And not questioning assumptions is not a good thing, especially for quality assurance. Not questioning assumptions, because you're afraid of confronting someone, for example. Other mental models, mistakes. What we learn in school is that you're not supposed to make any kind of mistake, because mistakes are bad. You get a bad grade if you do a mistake. So don't do mistakes. Well, the problem is that we need to explore, and by exploring, we will make mistakes. And I will go back to this concept in a couple of minutes. Another mental model is that, another thing we learn from school, you pursue individualistic goals, because you are evaluated as an individual, not as a team. There is nothing at schools that gives you a score to the class as a system, and not to the single individual. And the other thing is always keep a scientific mindset over a humanistic one, which works very well if you work with certain kind of problems, but if you work with people, you also need a humanistic side. You need both. If you do a technical work with people, you need both visions. So a question for you at this point could be, and I would understand that, well, why should I care? I mean, this is a technical conference, right? It's a testing, it's an agile testing conference. What's the point? Okay, let me tell you. Let's talk about creativity as a competitive advantage. Talking about business. Okay, I'm talking about business. There is an interesting story. By the way, this presentation was originally designed as a 60-minute long presentation. I have only 45. I decided not to take anything out because I liked the way the story flew. But at the same time, I need to make it shorter. So there was an interesting story, for example, which I'm not going to relate entirely, about this product, the Swiffer. The Swiffer came to existence because Procter & Gamble originally were looking for a better detergent to mop the floor, to clean the floor. Except that the chemists told to the Procter & Gamble guys, sorry, no, if we make a more powerful detergent, it would ruin the floor, especially if it is a wooden floor. So sorry, chemistry is not going to help you. So they, Procter & Gamble asked an external company to investigate the problem more. And these guys spent literally hundreds of hours watching videos of people mopping the floor. Heroes. Okay. I mean, how boring can that be? Okay. And they spent hundreds of hours watching these videos. And eventually they realized that the worst thing of mopping the floor is not mopping the floor, it's cleaning the clothes. Because the clothes, and I see many women here saying, yep, been there, yep, I know what you're talking about. Yep, even men, yep, we know what you're talking about. Good. And it makes sense to me because, I mean, the mopping cloth is intentionally designed to retain as much dirt as possible. It's designed for that. So you use it to grab as much dirt as you can, and then you have to clean it. Stupid, right? Not very efficient. And so they come up with this idea of a disposable mopping surface, as they called it. You just use the cloth as long as you want, and then when it's dirt, throw it away, replace it, and use another one. Very good product, except that Procter & Gamble initially, they didn't accept it. They said, no, sorry, nobody's going to buy this thing. But this company insisted, and eventually, after 1 year, some people actually try the product and say, wow, that's great. That's the best mopping experience I've ever had in my life. Okay. And so this product went to market, and Procter & Gamble made millions out of this product. And that's a story of creativity that was challenged by the fact that some managers in Procter & Gamble said, no, I'm not going to take the risk. This is new. We don't want to try anything new. What if we make mistakes? Okay? So making mistakes, the fear of making mistakes, is what prevents, in many circumstances, our creative initiatives, because we are afraid of making mistakes. Okay? So I'm not saying that making mistakes means to be creative. What I'm saying is that if you are afraid of making mistakes, you're not going to make any creative proposition. So that's a mental model that's working against us in business. In business. Okay? So yeah, creativity is essential, blah, 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 blah. This is just a summary of what I just told you. So, teamwork is a competitive advantage. This gentleman, he's Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he describes teamwork as one of the most important competitive advantages for a company. Well, he says that it's not finance, it's not strategy, it's not technology. It's teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage because it's powerful and because it's rare. And by teamwork, it means when you have a bunch of people who are aligned together to a common goal. That kind of teamwork. Okay. So that's another thing. And of course, not having been trained in working as a group works against this kind of teamwork. If you are being evaluated for your individual performance and you're not being evaluated for the group's performance, well, it's very unlikely that you can perform well as a team. That's another thing that you get from school. I'm not bashing schools. I mean, I'm grateful to the educational systems. I'm just moving forward. I'm moving on. Okay? Learning is a competitive advantage. Not individual learning, but organizational learning. When the team or the company collectively, they learn something about themselves, about what they did, about the way they work, about the way the market reacted. They learn all together as an organism. And Peter Senge, this gentleman, said that in the long run, the only sustainable source of competitive advantage is your organization's ability to learn faster than the competition. So I'm talking business again here. And what prevents some organizations from learning altogether is, then again, thinking that your company is like an assembly line, is a factory that mass produces goods. And that's not the case. What we do is not linear anymore, it's systemic. Collective intelligence is a competitive advantage, which is when you have a group of people, you put these people together, they work together, and hopefully the average intelligence of the group reflects the intelligences of the people in the group, okay? Hopefully. Most of the time, that's not the case. You put people together and the collective intelligence decreases. And you see this very clearly, for example, in political parties. I'm not kidding. I mean, you talk at these people, it doesn't matter on which side, okay? I'm not talking about politics. I'm just noticing that if you talk to the individuals, they are intelligent individuals. If you put them together and you look at the outcome of the group, it's not as smart. Okay, so that's another example. So how do you actually use collective intelligence to your advantage? Well, the thing is, what we do is we solve problems. In IT, what we do is we make our life a bit more complicated to make someone else's life easier. We solve problems. That's what we do. And these problems are frequently complicated. So we need to be able to tackle complexity together as a team, as a one organism who is more intelligent than the single individuals. Now, this can happen. We know that, for example, diversity is very important for collective intelligence. Men and women, but also different perspectives, different backgrounds. Okay, diversity. The first kind of diversity is men and women. That's my personal experience. In teams where there are men and women, usually the atmosphere is much better. I don't know if you have noticed the same thing. Okay. When conversation have even contributions, which means when you get together, when you plan for an iteration, that meeting is not dominated by the usual people, the usual 2 or 3 guys who constantly speak and the other guys are listening. So that means that the social and relational competence of people makes a serious difference in your ability, in your group's ability to be intelligent. Social and relational competence. And then the last thing is knowledge is a competitive advantage. Of course, it is. We work in a technical world, I mean, in a technical business, in a technical industry. So knowledge is important for us. The reason why there are elves on the screen, in case you're wondering, is because I took a blog post by Steve Blank, and he was talking about what happens when a startup becomes a company. And what happens sometimes is that the people who were there from the beginning, the eldest and wisest of creatures, to use Tolkien's words. Okay? At some point, they looked around and say, hey, this world has changed. This has become a company. There is bureaucracy. Okay? I don't want to be here anymore. I go somewhere else. And so the elves leave. Okay? And of course, that's a pity, because when the elves leave, we lose something. We all lose something. Now, he was talking about, of course, technical knowledge, but I would like to add more to this concept. There are other kinds of knowledge that we use in our work, like, for example, the history of the team, understanding the market, understanding the problem, having business relationships. There is a huge amount of knowledge that people have that make your company successful. It's not just technical. And when someone leaves, okay, we all get poorer. The other thing I would like to add about leaving is that sometimes people don't need to leave to be gone. What I'm talking is participation. Well, you see this, for example, in certain couples. I'm talking about men and women, okay? It's clear that they are no longer together. It's clear from the outside. It's just that they didn't realize it. Have you ever seen this kind of thing? Okay? So they don't participate anymore. They're no longer together. They just live under the same roof, but they're no longer together. Okay? That's the same thing that happens in teams sometimes. People stop participating. They are physically there, but they are gone. That's very sad. So, let's move on. So, okay, let's talk about ways of improving this. In my experience, there are many different management theories, organizational theories, and I think that they have something in common. All of them touch on certain points. And these points are having a shared goal is what keeps people together, and it makes them work collectively in an efficient and effective way. Being able to think out of the box, which means suspending some of the mental models. I mentioned social and relational competence, team learning, the ability to learn as a team, not as an individual, and system thinking. Now, of course, in 45 minutes, I don't have time to cover all of this stuff. So I picked two, and I picked shared goal and system thinking. So these are the two we're going to talk about briefly. Okay? So a shared goal is essential. It would be nice if the network would cooperate when I try to. Usually I do this with Bluetooth because I don't rely on local networks usually, but my iPad is too far away in this setting for Bluetooth. So, my friend, can you please swipe one more? Thank you very much. Okay. Shared goal. Now, a shared goal is an essential part of every team's activity. Now, there are many ways of creating a shared goal. You can tell, sell, test, consult. But let me give you a quick example. Telling the goal, it means that I am your leader, so to speak. So I come to you and I tell you, guys, that is our next goal. Go get it. That's telling. Okay? Or selling. It's not very different, but at least there is some participation. I come to you and I say, okay, guys, that's our next goal. And it's the best goal ever. I've never seen such a beautiful goal. Our life will be different when we get there. We will all be happy. Okay? So that's selling. Okay? Testing. That's our next goal. Do you see any problem in getting there? So I'm asking for your opinion. Consulting. That's our next goal. How do you think we should get there? What can we do to get there? I'm not just validating with you, I'm asking for your opinions, okay, and suggestions. So, but up to this point is still the old story that comes from factories. I am the manager, I know what to do, and you have to do it. Because up to this point, I'm just saying, I am the one setting the goal. I am saying that is the goal. And then I try to involve you on different levels, but I am saying that is the goal. Co-creating is when I come to you and I say, so what do we think our next goal should be? What do we think our next goal should be? Of course, this goal has to be aligned with the business, okay? It's a business goal, so it has to be consistent with what the company is doing. But it's our goal, it's not my goal. If you can bring people to that level of participation, you get more alignment, basically, and commitment and quality. Mental models, they are probably going to work against this. One thing you want to remember about mental models is that you cannot go against a mental model. You cannot tell someone, okay, no, be a good teammate now, and forget about what happened in school. Now you're here, okay? Or opposing these mental models. The best thing you can do about a mental model is, as David Bohm said, suspend it. There's a beautiful sentence by David Bohm, which is, normally our thoughts have us, rather than us having thoughts, which means that most of the time people are completely lost in their thinking, and they don't really communicate. Okay? So suspending, being aware of this, and suspending this is probably going to help you. System thinking. So why I'm talking about systems? Well, for two reasons. One is that your company and your team is a system, and also because I want to clarify the concept. Now, a system in general is defined as a web of elements who are interconnected and they basically interact with each other. The system tries to reach a balanced state, because if there is no balanced state, the survival of the system is at stake. Okay? The system needs to be balanced for its survival. Okay? Like birds. Okay? If they eat all the insects, okay, that system is imbalanced, and after a while, birds will die as well. Okay? So it needs balance. But the cause and effect relation, most of the time, is not linear, is not so clear to see. Fortunately, we can sometimes understand that there is a systemic behavior looking at data, looking at phenomenon. For example, have you ever, this kind of curve, does it remind anything to you? I mean, something that goes up, then seems to go down for a little while, then keeps going up, then goes down for a little while, then goes up again. The general trend is up, but sometimes it seems it's going better. Have you ever seen something like that? Technical debt, for example. It's getting worse and worse and worse until at some point you apply some kind of fix, and then it seems to be getting better, but actually you are accumulating more technical debt, and so you get worse and worse and worse, and so on. Okay? But it could also be something like a company who is in debt, and instead of using the new money coming in for investments, they use the money to pay the debts, and so they get more debts. That's another example. So if you look carefully at this trend, sometimes you can recognize that there are certain systemic patterns behind it. In software, we would call these patterns, but in system thinking, we call them archetypes. Same concept. Okay? So an archetype is that, for example, this is what we call a balancing loop, right? You have a problem, you apply a fix, and since you apply the fix, the problem goes away. Until you get another problem, then you apply another fix, and then things go better again. So it's a balancing loop. The more problems, the more fixes you apply, and things get even. Except when, just because you applied a fix, you have solved the problem on the short term, but sometime later, there are unintended consequences, which you could not see at first. And these unintended consequences are actually reinforcing the original problem. So you have a balancing loop and a reinforcing loop together. which is what creates this trend. One loop is reinforcing, the other one is balancing. That creates this kind of trend. So what's the point here? What I'm saying is that this is non-linear thinking. And in some cases, it gets more complicated than this. But this linear cause-effect relationship doesn't apply all the time. Now, the story is that since we come from a scientific mindset, very frequently we have the tendency of thinking that we can control the system. Even when the system, for example, is your team. That's one thing that managers sometimes do. They think that they look at the team as a system because, of course, in here you have individuals, they are interconnected, and they work together. The system has a boundary because the team is well-defined. It's defined in scope, defined in people. So that's a system. Then from the outside, you think that you can control and manipulate this system. In my opinion, the part of your mind that does this kind of thinking is what I like to call your small me. Your small me is the part of our brain which has been trained in observing something outside and trying to fix the problem, usually in a linear way, with a scientific approach. But when we are talking about teams, when we are talking about people, that's not the kind of relationship that you have. The kind of relationship is something more like this. If you are a manager, you are also influenced by what people around you are doing, and you influence people. If you are a leader, if you are a tester, if you are a developer, all these people are in fact interconnected. So what I'm suggesting is that one of the reasons why many projects in IT fail is because people in different positions in the organization have lost their systemic view of what they are doing. They don't see things as a system in which they belong, but they see things as something that they can adjust, as if it were external to them. Unfortunately, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. And in fact, I like usually to draw this analogy. Then again, we work in a technical industry. So technical knowledge is fundamental for our survival as a company. An IT company with no technical knowledge is dying. Okay? So we need the technical knowledge. We need our scientific mindset. And from a scientific point of view, when you look at things, you think, okay, so this is A, and this is B, and A is not B. It's a reductionist approach. Okay? We're used to separate things and bring them down in little pieces so we can handle complexity. So A is A and A is not B. If you think in a more organic way, also in a more systemic way, you start seeing that there is no such thing as A and B completely separated. Like this tiny plant here, it has roots and it has leaves. Of course, from a reductionist point of view, roots are roots and leaves are leaves, and leaves are not roots and vice versa, from a reductionist point of view. From a systemic, organic, holistic point of view, you could look a bit deeper and say, well, okay, but if there were no roots, there would be no leaf. If there is no leaf, there would be no roots. So what I'm saying is, if you look at it in a more holistic way, you understand that this is actually part of something bigger, and this is actually part of something bigger. And we have lost this idea of something bigger in organizations. We usually look at what the team is doing, what the department is doing, what this person is doing, and we have completely lost the perception that it's actually part of something much bigger, which includes the society, the stakeholders, the banks, the suppliers, everyone. And if you look from this point of view, the difference, the separation between A and B is not so clear. You can actually say the root is the leaf and the leaf is the root, because they're not separated. One cannot exist without the other. your company cannot exist without customers. So your company is the customers at the same time, if you look in a more organic way. And your customers are your company. Okay? Now, this is quite interesting if you want to bring in the concept of self-organization, because at this point, if you take this kind of approach, it's clear that people who lead are actually the ones who facilitate creating a shared goal. They are facilitators in creating a shared goal. Some people call these guys servant leaders. Okay? But it's a facilitation activity. Leaders are also responsible to identify constraints: money, time, technology, knowledge. There are constraints that we need to deal with, and someone needs to take care of those. Leaders provide resources. They agree on feedback cycles. So, team, should we get in touch every 2 weeks and have a chat so we know what's going on, for example? But it's an agreement. It's not imposed. And of course, you're available. Teams. See, that's teamwork. Thank you, my friend. Teams, they need to be able to communicate. Remember, I was talking about relational and social competence so that you can have real teamwork in teams. Okay? So they need to be able to feel that they can communicate openly. For example, say something without being afraid of being attacked back or some kind of retaliation. Okay? If I say this, I could get punished. Well, you don't want that fear in your team. Okay? Commitment and accountability to peer, collaboration and self-transcendence. Self-transcendence is what I was talking about, which means seeing a higher, larger scope, which is not just testing this unit of code. So, this is actually emancipation. It's not empowerment. It's a cultural change. Emancipation is when, well, empowerment is when someone gives power to you to do something, but that power could be taken back. Emancipation is when there is no going back. After women emancipated, there is no way that we can go back. Okay. After African Americans emancipated and we got rid of apartheid, there is no way that we can go back. That's emancipation. Okay. It's a more profound, it's a really profound cultural change in your organization. So, what is the beating heart, in my opinion? The beating heart of Agile is the reason why I started this talk saying to you, okay, I see companies who fail, teams who fail, and teams who succeed. And apparently there is no clear indication of why this is happening. Well, to me, the beating heart is the intent, the profound intent in individuals and organizations to do better and to be better. It's basically a desire for continuous improvement, for sustainable growth, suspending old organizational models that we have been using for 200 years, and that they're just not serving us very well anymore. We can learn this from professionals. I mentioned several authors. Also, coaches are a good source because they have an outside view of what's going on. We can learn this from peers, of course. This is a conference, so I would highly recommend that you talk to each other and share ideas and experiences. We can learn from ourselves, because there are certain things that we do in our industry. Like, for example, Thomas, I know you play music, right? You play the trombone. Yeah, good. Just a question. How many people here in this room that play music, even just by themselves or for fun, as a hobby? How many people? Okay, about 1/3. In case you're interested, whenever I ask this question, I get the same answer. It's about 1/3 of the room plays some kind of instrument. And my understanding is that since we are used to work with what is intangible. We are very good at abstraction, because that's what we do. We abstract all the time, and music is abstract. It's not something you can touch. So there is a connection. So we are used to think in abstract terms. We are used to see what is not visible, like software. Software is not visible. Code is visible, but code is just a static representation of something. It's a static, arbitrary representation. Software is not visible. Okay? But we're used to work with that. So abstraction, being connected. All of us use Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. We know that we are part of something bigger. Especially young generations, for them, it's absolutely normal to know that they are connected, to know that there is something bigger of what they can see. Okay. So this kind of capacities we can use and just project them on something new for us. We don't use them only on the technical side, only for their technical value, but we use them also for people. The ability to see what's going on in your organization, the ability to see the dynamics in the organization and understand them has to do with your ability to see abstract things, to see what is not visible. You just need to use that capacity for something else. And the best way of learning is by doing. So I would suggest that you don't read books about the subjects that I've been talking about, or at least you can read books. You can listen to a talk. You can go to a workshop. But if you really want to dance, if you really want to know what dancing is, you need to dance. And there is no other way to learn. There is no other way to learn. If you really want to understand dancing, dance. So I think I'm done. So what's a beating heart in a few words? I've been talking about sustainable growth. I've been talking about suspending mental models, developing system awareness, not system thinking, system awareness. Okay? And I've been talking about emancipating into new cultural business model. So that was the story, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. This is my contact information. Slides are on SlideShare. You find me on Twitter. You find me on LinkedIn. And of course, I'll be around. Well, we have one over there.
Thank you, Andrea, for your talk.
Thank you.
At the beginning, you have considered it as the weird one. So can you explain, please? Because I haven't heard anything weird.
Oh, so, thank you. So, okay, we're done then. I mean, no, sometimes I'd like to introduce, sometimes people come to this talk in a technical conference and they want something very technical and practical they can put into practice right away.
Code, for example.
Sorry?
Code.
Code, for example, or techniques. And that was just my advice, that these things, it's not something that you can go out of the room and apply right away. It's more cultural. Thank you. So, but thank you for letting me know that it was not so weird after all.
One more? You mentioned that creativity is blocked by the fear of mistakes. And you also mentioned that in teams, open communication is very important without retaliation. And feedback is sometimes considered retaliation. We know that creativity increases when you actually don't just spill ideas, but actually get direct, immediate feedback on this. It's actually part of Agile, as you put in the triangle yourself. How do you combine this apparent contradiction?
I completely agree with you that giving feedback is an art. So it takes a lot of social ability. Like, are you guys familiar with the core protocols in Agile? There is one thing which is called the perfection game. The perfection game is a structured way to give feedback where you focus on what can be improved and how you would improve it rather than what is not working. So you don't blame, you make constructive suggestions. And that's called the perfection game. So we have techniques that can help. I would like to hear this lady, though, and then...
Yeah, maybe because
okay.
I don't think we have time anymore.
Okay, so then again, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.